Hey guys, welcome to I'm Kovic.
And I'm Bruce Greene.
And the PC Master Race is really earning their title this week.
That's right. While they're not quite invading Poland just yet, PC gamers the world over have banded together to start branding games on Steam that only run in 30 frames per second.
We said no World War II jokes this week, but here we are.
We did it.
So anyway, this all started at the behest of John TotalBiscuit Bain, who started a curator group with the apparent intention of informing PC gamers which games are locked at 30 frames per second.
Lawrence, what do you think the intention here is?
Well, on the surface, it's pretty simple. Just objectively list every game that's locked at 30 FPS so consumers can decide for themselves which games to avoid if frame rates are important to them. And in addition to that, it actually provides a pretty good service. If a game is locked at 30 FPS, but there's a simple tweak or a mod to unlock higher frame rates, it lists all that and some of the issues that may occur, like physics weirdness or animation problems.
Right, so is this good? Is this bad? It's kind of hard to say, and it depends on where you're coming from.
Right, both TotalBiscuit and those that have joined the curation project insist that the list is purely objective and thus above any kind of reproach.
Right, to an extent, they're right. The list is extremely holistic, only listing games and tips on how to unlock higher frame rates if the game supports it.
Right, but you have a problem with this, right, Lawrence?
Well, some people do, not just me. The issue is the sentiment behind the list and the reason it was created. You could argue that this list is meant to tell people to avoid games that are locked at 30 FPS.
Right.
And whether or not that's the intent of the list, TotalBiscuit does say in his announcement video that, quote, "I am so used to high frame rates that I just can't play games at 30 FPS anymore. It's just not acceptable, I think, in 2015 to have games running at that frame rate," which, to a degree, I kind of agree with him. I'm a frame rate snob myself.
Yeah.
I like playing games at higher frame rate, but the problem comes when you start telling other people to do things based on your preferences, which you could argue this list is doing, or maybe not. It gets very fuzzy.
Well, that's interesting, because I have a weird opinion here. I don't care, so where do I go on Steam to find games?
You just go to Steam.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
cool.
That's all you do.
I didn't even know about curation groups until today.
Lawrence, what else does he go on to claim?
Yeah. So he goes on to claim that, quote, "There's no subjective opinion on this anywhere," which is true. But the conflict there is that his subjective opinion is what led to the list creation in the first place.
This is further compounded by the group's description, which changed from claiming that, quote, "you deserve better," to mentioning that the list is meant to inform.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of get it, because it's subjective is what a lot of people like, and they banded together to create a group for other like-minded people.
Makes total sense.
That
Makes total sense.
seems to be what the entire curation group is all about. So overall, it would seem that TotalBiscuit's intention for creating the list is to have a reference for games to avoid. The tone of the page and the conversation surrounding it has become a bit more neutral since the group's creation, but the list creation was clouded a little bit in negativity, maybe tongue-in-cheek. That's essentially what the PC Master Race, I mean, it's called PC Master Race.
Right.
You
Well,
can't
now-
really
now
take
they're-
anything they say seriously.
And now they're going towards the middle a little bit. So
Yeah.
it stands to reason that others would use the list for that purpose as well, for negative purposes. Now, instead of being a purely informational resource, this is becoming kind of a public shame list to try and goad developers into developing games that target higher frame rates.
So with something like that, would that actually cause any problems, Lawrence?
Yeah, it could. First of all, the list is a little too comprehensive. So it includes games where higher frame rates would be expected and actually would materially impact the game. These are games like Batman, Arkham Knight, Dark Souls, like action games that should be smooth. But there are also RPGs on there where frame rate is kind of immaterial. Things like Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition. This is a remake of a really old RPG. Saying that it should be 60 FPS, especially since its sprite work, is a little strange.
Yeah.
Also, South Park Stick of Truth. This game is meant to look like a 29 FPS TV show.
Right.
So rendering it in 60 would almost be stylistically wrong. So yes, including it on this list is informationally accurate. But if you view this list as everything should be 60 FPS and avoid these games, then it becomes a little weird. You're telling people to avoid games that are stylistically the way they are for a reason.
Well, in his Frame Rate Police video, TotalBiscuit actually even mentions South Park Stick of Truth and says that maybe, there are some people, I mean, bless your souls out there, that enjoy shows that have that true motion effect on it.
Oh, right, the 120 hertz, right?
I've
on
never
TV,
seen
yeah.
South Park look like that, but I guess if people want that, they can have it.
Well, it makes everything
I
look
guess.
like a soap opera, and it's not necessarily sometimes the way TV or movies are meant to be viewed.
Yeah.
But a lot of people view games as meant to be viewed at 60 frames a second. If you acknowledge the list was made for subjective reasons, it's effectively telling consumers to not buy a game based on frame rate, when frame rate is not even an issue in a lot of the games we just mentioned.
I was gonna say, that's your prerogative. If you look at a box and say, it doesn't do the frame rate that I want, I don't want it, that's you. That's
absolutely,
fine.
yeah.
That's empowering you as a consumer. That's fine.
Well, the weird thing is we kind of have a conflicting message coming from the gaming audience, right, Lawrence?
Yeah, so you've got one, I'm not saying these are the same people, but you have a certain group of people that are very upset about downgrades. So you'll see a video at E3, it has certain lighting effects or graphical effects that are taken out later, presumably to maintain stability and frame rate. And then you have another group that's upset that frame rates aren't high enough. So basically there's this tug of war where the gaming audience is saying these conflicting things to developers who are kind of caught in the middle. and they're using, as in this case specifically, using objectivity as kind of a blindfold to ignore the fact that there are development realities that maybe prevent 60 FPS from ever happening. And that was actually described by a game developer who goes by the handle Ravenok on the Cynical Brits subreddit.
So Ravenok describes achieving flawless 60 frames per second as no simple task. So he or she goes on to warn that, I quote, for smaller developers, the smaller productions, the existence of something like Frame Rate Police, if it gains a following, might prove fatal.
Wow, he or she basically says the cost involved with developing a game to 60 frames a second may be so prohibitive that it would prevent some games from being made in the first place at all.
So some people are actually okay with that. Reddit user Tarvis said as much in no uncertain terms. He writes, if 30 frames per second hurts your sales so much that you go out of business, that's your own fault.
Whoa, that's a big Tarvis boom there. So let's think about this. Will this actually affect anything? What do you think, Lawrence?
I think it all boils down to whether this list or discussions like this list, basically people demanding certain features, has a material and monetary impact on sales.
Right.
And if you think about it that way, it kind of boils down into three big groups. The first group, people that don't care about frame rate, don't care about this list. So they're going to buy a game, play it, have fun, and they're unaffected. Sales are unaffected, basically. There's a group that does care about this stuff, and they'll use this list to have more information, which is good. They'll make a better informed purchasing or not purchasing decision. But the thing that occurs to me is, without this list, if they bought a game that was locked at 30 FPS and they hated that, they would just get a Steam refund, which is essentially a non-sale. So either they have this list and don't buy the game in the first place, or they buy the game and go through the headache of getting a refund. Either way, it's not a sale. So that group is also unaffected when it comes to the money at the end of the day.
Right.
The only one that does matter is this mysterious third group that may not even exist. These are people that would have bought a game and would have been happy with it and not asked for a refund. But just because this list has been made, now they are not going to buy a game because they are told that 30 FPS is bad.
So in that specific circumstance, this list would cost a game and a developer sales.
Right. So how big is that group? We're guessing not huge.
Yeah,
but
it's kind of hard to say right now.
It's really hard to say right now. And honestly, if you're the type of person who has to be told what to buy, please don't be that person. Be informed. Inform yourself more than anything. And make your own decision.
I like purple dinosaurs.
I got a game for you.
And they're in 60 frames a second, so you can get it.
I like 30 frames.
It's called Batman.
I like 18 frames.
Oh, well, we don't have that game.
I like 26 frames.
That's ultimately the problem here, though. This list was created with a subjective goal of warning consumers away from certain products. Additionally, its only possible outcome is lost sales. But Lawrence, there's one other case, right?
Maybe. So if you think real hard, you can come up with a situation in which this actually does sell a game, and that's, say somebody wants 60 FPS, the game is 30, but they get the information on how to unlock 60 in the list. So they're on the fence. It's a game they want to buy. They don't want to play it in 30, but this list says, oh, you can just do an I9 tweak to unlock 60. They're like, cool, awesome. I'll go ahead and buy it and play it.
That makes sense. But before we get too negative, we can appreciate the function of this list, even if the motivations behind creating it are a little duplicitous. Anything that provides more information to the consumer is a good thing. We like that here.
Yeah. So furthermore, it's a good reminder that this sort of information should be provided on Steam by default.
Absolutely.
It's silly that in this day and age that certain functionality isn't fully exposed on Steam.
Right. We should see technical details like frame rate locks, supported resolutions, the ability to render in borderless windows, etc.
Yeah. So what is the elegant solution here, Lawrence?
Well, Ravenok actually suggests that we make a community with a positive sentiment rather than an implied negative one.
Let's call it free hugs.
Ooh,
Yeah,
free hugs,
basically,
I like that.
just hugs all around. He or she writes that PC gamers should, quote, praise games that function flawlessly on 60 FPS instead of putting games that couldn't on a shame bench.
Yeah, and then also we can't really confirm or deny whether this person is actually a game developer, but that is one thing that I often forget, that we don't make games.
Sure.
I don't know. I imagine it's very hard, and from what I've seen, it is very hard.
It takes years.
So I'm not going to scream at someone for not doing a thing that I wanted.
I want 46 frames.
Well, that's
that
a weird
either,
frame,
man.
but
It's a weird
they
one.
might not get my money.
Okay. Ultimately, we'd argue, as always, that you use your own brain and do your own research. If you
Yes.
like higher frame rates, that's awesome. We all like higher frame rates here. If you don't care, that's also great. No
Kind of
problem.
where I fall. So overall, just please avoid mob mentalities and try to understand that game development can be a series of compromises that you can or cannot influence.
Yeah, please like and subscribe for more compromises here on the Nut.
That's all we do.
150 frames.
I told you we couldn't do that
But
one.
not in a second.
We can't do that one.
In 20 minutes.
Let me look at the frame bucket.
I want my frames over the course of an hour.